All right, well, welcome everyone to our webinar. We're going to be talking today about evaluating strategic plan progress with agency-wide scorecards. So this is part of a larger series that we've been doing, a deep dive into the organizational standards. So I'll show you towards the end, we've actually focused on a few other topics with risk management, setting the mission and direction of the organization and the board's role in that. And we have some recordings that you can view, the ones we've already conducted. And we have one more coming up in a couple of weeks related to staff training and orientation. So we're happy you all have joined us today. We're going to go through our agenda. And just to note too, I'm Courtney Kohler from the National Community Action Partnership. So I'm a senior associate on the Training and Technical Assistance team. And with us today, we also have Barbara Mooney from the Association of Nationally Certified Roma Trainers. So we'll be presenting the content to you today. We're going to, first of all, just review some of the connections to the organizational standards related to this work. We'll talk a little bit about a standard of excellence, so talking a little bit about going beyond compliance, a standard of excellence that relates into this work. Then we're also going to talk about how to integrate the strategic plan into management and operations, evaluating and understanding the data that you're gathering from strategic plan progress. And then we'll talk a little bit about using dashboards and scorecards, as well as give you a few different examples. So as I mentioned, these webinars that we've been doing tie into the CSBG Organizational Standards. And just a quick overview of these standards, they're organized into 3 different thematic groups. Today we're focusing in on 2 different categories actually, coming from the vision and direction as well as operations and accountability section of these standards. So we're going to be talking about strategic planning as well as data and analysis. So there's a few different specific standards that come into play here, even in standard 2.3, because actually, what we're talking about today kind of goes into all of the different categories in some way, because your strategic plan, is encompassing all of these things that your agency does. But standard 2.3 says that the organization communicates its activities and results to the community. So part of evaluating your progress and your strategic plan is also talking to your community about what you've been doing and how you're addressing those needs that you find in your community needs assessment. Then looking at category 9 around data and analysis, the organization should have a system or systems in place to track and report client demographics and services that customers are receiving. Part of that is what goes into your strategic plan as far as who you're going to serve, what activities you're going to conduct to be able to meet those needs. And then standard 9.2, the organization should have a system or systems in place to track the family, agency, and or community outcomes as well. So those changes that are taking place as a result of your services and strategies. There's also some specific actions to, that involve the board of directors for the community action agency. And these are outlined in the standards on your screen. So 1.3 talks about the customer satisfaction data, making sure that there's that systematic approach to collecting, analyzing, and reporting that type of data to the board. Standard 5.9 talks about the programmatic reports that the board should be receiving at each regular board meeting. And then 6.5 and 9.3 are kind of where we're zeroing in today, where we're talking about the governing board, should be receiving those updates on the progress of meeting the goals that are within the strategic plan, at least annually. And then in 9.3, this kind of takes it a step further, that the organization, should be presenting to the governing board for review or action, at least annually, about the analysis of the agency's outcomes, and then any operational or strategic plan adjustments that are identified as a result of that review and presentation to the board. So these are all to say we want to make sure that the agency is looking organization-wide with the strategic plan, that it's being integrated into management and operations, and that the board is involved in that process as well, especially as they're working to guide and direct the organization, which is what we talked about in our previous webinar a few weeks ago. Whenever we start to, of course we want to meet the organizational standards, but we also want to make sure that we are thinking about not just those minimum requirements, but we're thinking about how do we really make sure we're being organizations of excellence and moving up that continuum. So the standards of excellence, if you can kind of imagine this continuum, you have the CSBG Organizational Standards as the minimum compliance. And then on up the continuum, you have the standards of excellence that really are kind of those optimal, best-in-class practices for a community action agency. And our standards of excellence, these are very specific to community action. We have a link to them if you haven't seen them before, or if you'd like to review them, but it's kind of our premier organizational capacity building initiative at the Community Action Partnership. But we have one standard of excellence that really focuses in on this topic, and it essentially encompasses everything that we're talking about today, because it looks at a formal system that's integrating strategic, operational, financial, administrative, and other performance-related data and those results into a comprehensive agency-wide scorecard. And so being able to track all of this information together can lead to better evaluation for the organization and better identification of whether the organization is meeting those strategic plan goals. So again, just as it says in the organizational standards, this should be shared with the board, and that this can help to track and improve agency performance over time if it's used effectively to be able to make decisions for improvement. So I won't go into all of the details that are in here, but you can always look this up, but this is a very good comprehensive standard of excellence for an agency to work towards. So in saying that, we're going to kind of get into the details of it today. This is kind of a funny little comic. Hopefully this is not describing your organization, but it happens. And so, you see that, this person says that they're cleaning out an old bookshelf in the office, and they found a complete set of strategic plans dating all the way back to the 70s. And they're in mint condition. It's obvious they were never read or implemented. And because implemented plans are commonplace, your set is worth nothing, though it is a good source of recycled paper. So hopefully, all of your strategic plans are tattered and well used. I know maybe you're not looking at them on paper as much anymore, but hopefully those files in your computer or wherever they're at have been opened many, many times. And that there's associated implementation plans and progress tracking scorecards and all of that stuff. So we're going to talk about today how to make sure that you're not falling into this comic. So how do we avoid this scenario? We want to make sure what we're doing is integrated into strategic plan, or our strategic plan is integrated into management and operations. So just kind of an overview of what we're talking about with the strategic plan and these elements. A lot of times if you're thinking about, doing this type of work with scorecards and dashboards and evaluating progress, you need to make sure you have the right stuff in the plan in the beginning. So part of that is writing an outcomes-based strategic plan, really making sure that you're identifying what will change as a result of the activities, strategies, and services that you're providing. So you want to make sure it has those outcomes at the family, community, and agency levels, that you're also including what the agency then will do to be able to meet those outcomes you're setting. So you want to make sure there's a clear structure and process for implementation. So this is where good details come in. You want to make sure that strategies and services, that there's staff assigned to those specific actions and a timetable that's established, as well as what partners need to be engaged in that process as well, especially when you're working at the community level. In the planning process, you want to make sure that the right measures are identified. So all of your short-term goals should have those measures associated with them so that you can then establish benchmarks so that you can track that progress over time and see how you're moving to achieve those targets that you've set as an organization. You want to make sure you're identifying data sources as well, creating a data collection process. So some of this goes back to that assessment process, making sure that that is a comprehensive process as well. And then also inputting data regularly. So making sure your data collection processes in your organization are sound, and that you're really looking at how to make sure that you're collecting accurate data, that it's timely, and that it's complete and that it's reliable. And then as a result of making sure you're including all these things in the planning process, you can hopefully see that big picture emerge. And then as far as monitoring the plan, you want to have a plan to monitor in place. And so you want to develop a schedule for the elements of the plan to be reviewed by both the staff and the board, identifying who will be responsible for gathering the data, aggregating it, analyzing it, and then presenting it for review. And with this type of task, you want to make sure that you're thinking of staff who have strengths in this area. And so people who are good at making data visually appealing, easily understood, is going to be a strength in this area. Also people that are just in general good at numbers and kind of digging into what those things mean. Comparing progress with what is projected in the plan is going to be important, considering how to support or prevent what might be supporting or preventing progress during that. Also identifying any areas that might need more assessment. So you have your needs assessment to factor in, but as you're doing a planning process and beginning to monitor the plan, you might identify some additional data that you need to bring into the picture. And then conducting updates to the strategic plan outcomes and action plans as necessary. So kind of going back to the comic, you want to make sure that your plan doesn't just sit on the shelf, that it's really this living document that you're, if you need more data, you can go out and get that and add to it if needed, that you're measuring that progress, updating as big events such as a global health pandemic is taking place, that all of that kind of is playing into the plan and keeping it alive for the present day. So we have facts, figures, and stories that all come together to make useful information as we analyze. So we want to make sure that we're not just looking at the raw data and taking it at that, that we're really analyzing it into information, because it has to be analyzed before it can really be useful. And so the kind of this path for data collection and reporting, the staff can report to leadership. Leadership often then reports to board, and then board provides that strategic guidance. So you want to make sure that everyone understands their role in the collection of data and analysis in the organization. We actually have some additional trainings that go deeper into this topic, but we would just want to make sure that this is kind of at the forefront as we're talking about the elements of the strategic plan, and then, of course, gathering that data on the progress of the plan as well. So this is an example of a schedule for monitoring. Of course, this is not how you have to do it, but it's one way that an agency could do it. Monthly, you might be asking the question, did we do what we said we were going to do? So how many people have been served? How many services have been delivered? What strategies have been implemented? Then quarterly, you might be asking the question, are we making the progress that we intended? So has anything changed? What changed? How many or how much? And then semi-annually or annually, you might be asking whether we're, in general, going in the right direction based on where our strategic plan is pointing us. And then based on the answer to that question, you might end up making some recommendations to the strategic plan. So with that, I want to go ahead and turn it over to Barbara, and she's going to talk about improving our understanding of the data. Oh, there you go.
There you are. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for setting the foundation there. We're going to look at how the data that's collected can be shared with your partners, with your agency, with your board, and so on. So specifically, when we talk about strategic plan progress, we are looking at performance management data. And so what's been happening? What do we need to tell people? What's the story that we need to actually share? There's a big focus on performance management, and so we want to make it easy for people to understand the data. So we're going to dig into the concept of performance reporting in this webinar, specifically that have to do with visual presentations that would help make the data more accessible. So when we used to talk about programs by outcomes, program performance, and of course we still do this, but the idea that it's easy to talk about program outcomes if you're looking at a specific program area. So if you're involved in weatherization, you know about weatherization, you understand weatherization, the program outcomes and the services that are related to weatherization are familiar. And so it's easy to understand, and so on with the other programs on the slide. But if you're looking at agency-wide outcomes, where you're looking at family outcomes that are produced by services that might be from many different kinds of program areas, and you're also looking at community outcomes and agency outcomes, you're looking at all of these outcomes at an agency-wide perspective, then you need to start thinking about how the connection is made and how you can share that data. One of the things that you find to be problematic is that you don't know what service necessarily is connected to the outcome. So if it's a single service and a single outcome, it's easy. But if it's any of the other things that you see on the slide where you have multiple services that come in to produce one outcome, or multiple outcomes that come from a single service, or more commonly multiple outcomes from multiples, then you have to start to figure out how to provide this information in a way that's understandable to people. So when we're looking at bringing it together, we come up with these concepts of a dashboard. And the dashboard concept allows you to bring in data from different parts of the agency, compare different specific NPIs and customer information, what's working, what's not working. And it's like a dashboard on your car. And so before you create a new kind of dashboard, you have to figure out what data is going to go into it and how you're going to bring it together. So I thought it would be useful to just give you a little bit of information about a dashboard. Again, performance reporting is the presentation of data that comes from various parts of the agency. And the point of this performance reporting is to facilitate the analysis of the data for decision making. So we want to simplify both program reports and fiscal reports. Don't forget, we need information about fiscal reports as well as about the program reports. And one of the things that we're looking for is improving communications so that the more that people understand, the more that people are able to talk to each other about things, the more they have a common agenda, the greater results they can produce. And so that's our point for all of this. So what is it about a dashboard and a scorecard that might be important for us to understand? Well, the dashboard indicates the status of something at a specific point in time, whereas the scorecard displays the relationship between a goal and an actual performance. You might think of the scorecard as being how are we doing, and the dashboard answers the question, where are we now? So we're looking at two different concepts there. again, we're gonna look at the difference between dashboard and scorecard, and then we're gonna think about how we can use each of these and how we can figure out what data goes into each one. The dashboard is more tactical, operationally focused. It's used for short-term decision making. Think about you're driving in your car. You look down, you see the speed that you're at now. You can adjust your speed based on what you see. So that's a short-term decision-making process. Where the scorecard is more strategically focused on the long range. It's typically used by leadership, and it's usually used for long-term decision making. The dashboard provides a snapshot of real time, and it highlights the relationship between performance elements. So between program services, between different elements of your performance, whereas the scorecard is a comparison between projected outcomes and actual performance. So some of the elements of a scorecard. The scorecard would actually include the long-term goals. What are the strategic outcomes that you expect to achieve? And then it would be identify key performance indicators. When I first started looking into scorecards, I saw a KPI everywhere, and I thought, I wonder what that is. When I looked it up, and I said, oh, that's our national performance indicators. In the rest of the world, they call them key performance indicators, and they have to create them themselves. Whereas in community action, we have a standardized set of national performance indicators that allow us to have common language across our whole network. So those key performance indicators are ours in that point. And then another element of scorecards is it compares projected with actual. So that's important to know. A couple elements of the dashboard. This is where you bring together different elements and you compare them. You can bring together the idea that different sets of databases and different places from your agency can put data together into this dashboard. And so it can also talk about cause and effect. If there are relationships that are dependent on each other, you can show that in a dashboard. And one of the things that you can do is you can actually take scorecards from different programs and bring them together and include them on a dashboard. Again, think of your dashboard on your car. You can be looking at the gasoline usage. You can be looking at the temperature, as well as speed and mileage that you've gone. So you can bring together lots of different elements from across the program area. And we're thinking about the value added all the time. If you're going to do something different, if you're going to do something new, there's going to be time, there's going to be effort, there's going to be learning, maybe new materials. Why would you bother to look at performance reporting in this new way or this graphic way? Well, there's some real values that can be added. You can really use this kind of visual presentation to understand that's been done, the work that's been done, compare the work that's done with the achievement of goals, determine if you're on track with your agency plans, consider the direction of the agency. Is it really still working towards the mission? And then if you identify that it's not, it gives you a chance to make adjustments and make changes to your plan. It'll help you evaluate the use of resources, and it'll help you look at patterns and trends at both community and family levels that you're working with. When you have a good presentation of your data, you're engaging in conversation with the individuals in your organization. this kind of presentation adds context to just numbers. If you give someone just a list of numbers, here's my report. Oftentimes that doesn't stimulate any discussion. But if you have a context for those numbers, if you can highlight trends, if you can think about projections, then what that does, it actually stimulates questions, and it allows you to consider different kinds of discussions that might lead to different kinds of outcomes. You can use a scorecard or a dashboard, doesn't matter what you call it. So it's just that you have some graphic way of thinking about it. So the first thing that we want to think about is what kind of data you're going to display. Is it fiscal data? Is it staff performance data? Is it about customers or agency procedures? What is it that we're talking about? So here's an example on the next slide. These are 3 scorecards, so to speak, of a program where you have April and May at the bottom of the slide, and then June at the top of the slide. And what you're doing is you're comparing the expected and the actual along several different areas. So you're looking at enrollment, you're looking at the individuals who've risen above the poverty guidelines, obtained employment, and so on. And so you can see the cumulative change in the actuals across these 3 months. So back in April, we didn't see much movement in enrollment or in many of the areas. But then in May, you see a big surge of enrollment. And then at the end of the year, you see that they've met or exceeded all of their target numbers. So to have this kind of information over several months and to be able to compare it would allow you to ask questions about the relationships among those various elements, the time frames, and so on. So that would be, these are scorecards that have to do with the performance measures of this program. And then on the next slide, you'll see in the bottom left side that June scorecard is included in this dashboard. And other things that are included in the dashboard are some fiscal reports about the way the money was expended, about staffing, about how many staff there were, by quarter over the course of the year, and then customer satisfaction. So you see that we've brought together 4 different kinds of data in this dashboard to look at different elements. And so rather than having pages and pages and pages of data to sort through, you have this snapshot of several different elements that work together. And remember, it's about producing questions and stimulating conversation. So I'm going to turn this back over to Courtney at this point and ask that you mute me, please.
All right. Thanks, Barbara. So hopefully that gave you a good overview of dashboards and scorecards, how they can be used differently, but also how they can be used together. And so now we're going to talk a little bit about getting started. And, you know, what we want to do is help make this feel manageable, because I know that some people, whenever they start to engage in this process of developing a scorecard or dashboard and, you know, being able to better report their strategic plan progress, it feels really overwhelming sometimes. And so you want to start with something that feels manageable and that you truly understand, as well as your audience, you know, truly understanding. So you want to make sure first that you understand your audience and what they want to know. And then you want to pick just a few. So, you know, 3 to 4, maybe 4 to 6 measures, and to start out with, to be able to communicate through the dashboard or scorecard. And you want to make sure that you're not choosing too many, especially in the very beginning, that your audience stops paying attention. You want to use data that you're already collecting as you start this. And then you want to make sure that you're kind of entering this with a flexible mindset so that you can Whenever something new might happen, you can, bring in kind of a highlight, or if there is data that you need to add further on, down the process, that you can do that. So the other thing you want to think about too is making sure that this is based on your community action agency. Looking at examples can be really, really helpful, and we're going to show you some today as well, and you just saw some that Barbara showed you also. But you want to make sure that it's the dashboard you build for your organization is in direct response to the needs of your organization, as well as your strategic plan. So they should absolutely align. Dashboards are typically designed to help decision makers, executives, senior leaders be able to establish targets and set goals, as well as understand what happened or why something happened. The information that you gather from dashboards can help identify changes that might need to be made in the organization. And then you want to make sure that as you're trying to maximize insights through dashboards, you want to include data that's collected over a period of time determined by the user. So you want to make sure it's time limited over the last month, quarter, year, of course, that all the data that you're reporting falls within that time frame. So the more detail also that you use in the scorecard, is going to be most helpful. So we talked about only picking a few measures, but making sure that what you choose to put in there, that you are using detailed information that's not too vague. You also want to make sure that it's easy to focus. So one way to do this, presenting a selection of indicators in a visual display, so that can help to stimulate conversation. So if you're just putting numbers on a page, sometimes it's easy to kind of, glance past that. But if you're able to color code, create a visual display, that can be helpful. So, as you're looking at this example here, the number 100 might not mean much, but with a visual indicator, someone might, be able to identify that that's something you might need to talk about. So that idea of engaging in conversation, like Barbara mentioned, is such a key part of this, and sometimes the visual aspect of your scorecard or dashboard can really help to stimulate that conversation. A lot of times this red, green, yellow system is really easy to use because it's understood by everyone. Most people think green means good or go, red means stop or not so great. Another thing that you want to think about whenever you're doing this, though, is making sure that you have a universal key. So not just assuming that everyone's going to know what your different color indicators might mean. We might look at different sample scorecards that have quarterly performance that is kind of compared over time. But as you're looking at this and you see all the small numbers and the narrow rows, it can kind of be difficult to read. So you want to make sure that you're making it easy to read, easy to recognize what you should be focusing on. So this same data here has now been enhanced. So you can see where you pull out kind of the rates that are included here. You have the colors that are highlighting where you might need to focus in discussion. Because the reality of it is, whenever you're presenting this to the board or the leadership is looking at this, you're not going to be able to probably, in the time limited, space, you're probably not going to be able to focus on every single number that's on a dashboard or scorecard. So you want to make sure that you're kind of highlighting and pulling out where the attention might need to focus. And you can also see that the actual numbers are, now included here too. There's more data than there was on the prior slide, where you can see the rate and the actual was empty there. Now it's filled in. But then this one is easier to understand, even though there are more numbers, because your eyes are kind of focused into those certain areas. So here's kind of a blank, if you will, template of how your organization could take something like this and use it potentially in alignment with the strategic plan that you have. And so, this is where it's going to be important to look at what are the elements in your strategic plan to identify what are those elements that might need to be in your scorecard. And especially getting clear on the language that your organization uses as well, because what's here on the screen might not exactly align with what your organization uses, but you need to, again, make it work for your organization. And so you can this might be for just one strategic priority or strategic focus area, but you have your outcomes that you're working to achieve, what the target or indicator is that associates with that, services and strategies, what your organization's measure of success is, so what is your definition of when that's achieved, your progress, actual year to date, and then you can color code that. So again, this is just one example. You're going to see some more as well, but you can make that work to what your organization needs. So one example we do want to highlight here is from Economic Security Corporation. Debbie Markman has generated some good resources for their organization, and her strategic plan scorecard, we're just kind of showing a snapshot of it here based on their strategic plan that they did this last cycle. And so kind of the same sort of thing. They include their NPIs on here. So that was one of the elements that Barbara talked about earlier. The goal that it's tied to, what their target was, their achieved, and kind of where they're at in achieving that. And then they have the part that is color-coded to identify kind of where they are. If it's on track, if it needs an explanation, that sort of thing. So it can be helpful to kind of have these keys that tell you where to focus your attention. You can see on this right here where they do have some of these different colors. They have some that are completed, and then some of these where it does need a further explanation because of where they're at. And that's where that focus discussion can take place, and adjustments might need to be made as a result. All right, so now I'm going to turn it back over to Barbara, and she's going to talk a little bit more about this topic. Oh, and you're muted. Might need more. There we go.
Thank you. Thank you. One feature of a dashboard is that it's data in real time. And so when we think about real time, again, if you're driving in a car, real time is when you look down at the speedometer, you want to know what the speed is this very instant. In the reporting that we're talking about, that kind of instantaneous data is probably not needed. You don't need to make those decisions quite that immediately. So you have to think about what real time might be. So you want the data to be current. You want it to be you want to know that it's fresh, that it's not old data. But how often is it? How often will you update your data? And so we ask a number of folks that are experts in creating these kinds of graphic presentations, visual presentations. How often do things need to be updated? And here's what they said. They said, as often as you told people you would do it. So if you said that you were going to update your data every day, then that's what you need to do. If you told them that you would do it every week or every month, then that's what you must do. You must keep to the commitment that you made to your stakeholders. So I thought that was interesting because it really allows you to think about things. And some of the things that you want to think about is the idea, the second bullet there is as often as it makes sense. So if you know that you're collecting data from across your programs on a monthly basis, then you wouldn't commit to doing weekly updates of the data. So it's really important to know how often you collect your data. A couple ideas about this is about the frequency of data. The frequency of the data really has an impact on how often you're going to update your dashboard or what your dashboard display might look like. So you just want to be clear about it, and you want to make sure that it connects to what makes sense in your organization. And if you have a system, some people have a software system that pulls data from sources daily, but then they're not collected into a reporting system daily, then you want to make sure that you're clear with people that this data was collected daily, but it's not recorded until the end of the week. So it's just a matter of clarity. And I think that's an important consideration that you have to make, is how frequently you're going to collect and update your data. So here are a couple more. Oh, and one of the ways that you want to do that, one of the ways you want to establish that frequency is by knowing what the purpose is. Is this to identify stakeholders that are outside the agency, or is it about internal management? And maybe you have different audiences that you want to provide this performance reporting to. Different audiences will have different purposes. For example, your internal supervisors might want to know how often the staff is meeting with the customers or with the help seekers. And that might not be of any interest to the external funders, but it's important for your internal management. So you may have different kinds of data that you collect and different frequencies of collecting it, but it's all about you identifying the purpose of the reporting. So here's an example of, this is a management level example where you're looking at the left of some different strategic priorities and identify what the initiative is, what the outcomes are, and then so on, and then status at the extreme right. So that at a glance, you can look at this and you can see that strategic priority 1 is moving along. 1.1 is certainly moving along, and you can see that there are different strategy types and different progress measured there. So for management purposes, you may want to break things down into smaller bites than you would normally. And this is a board level example. Now you can see this is a little less broken down into steps. This is a bigger picture. So it's about the status, the milestones, and then what the next steps are. And you can see that there's a code either on track, needs attention, or off track. So a simple way to look at the board priorities and where you are with them. This is an example from one of our certified Roma professionals, Bobby Dykey, who is the executive director in Texas. And this actually was an outgrowth of his work with the standards of excellence that Courtney mentioned earlier. And so what they did was they created, and this is an interesting example. It's an interesting example because on the right it shows the different elements of the scorecard. The different elements of the scorecard. That there are performance measures, there's scoring criteria, and there's also the tabulation and the reporting. So they laid out a process of how they would do the scorecard. And go ahead on the next page then. And this is an example of what the scoring criteria looked like. So 100% of the offices, they got a 3 points. 86, they got 2 points. 70% of the offices, they got 1 point. So they established criteria. So there was no question that everybody was scoring their performance in the same way at many different sites. And then finally, they had a report that they proposed that broke it into different sections, like the mission and vision. The possible points are listed there, and then the points that they got would be listed there. So this is just a blank one that he shared with us. that we thought was particularly helpful. And you can see that it's a simple process, that it's not complicated, but it really is designed to give you some good data. Again, who's going to see this? Once you decide your purpose, you want to know who the audience is, what's important to them, and then what format. And then this really important one about who's responsible for updating the information. And then all of this goes to tell what questions you want to answer. So that will help you with your performance reporting. One of the questions that we asked the experts was, well, what are your best case suggestions? And the first thing was start with something. Start with something simple. Don't try to put everything into a scorecard or a dashboard right away, but start with something. Try it out. And then interact with your data. You might have to make changes to what you've done. You might have to come back and pick out different kinds of data, do it more frequently or less frequently. So all the things that we've talked about, you might need to adjust, but the tip is start with something, know your capacity, keep it simple, and interact with your data. So just some closing thoughts about this process. It's really about stimulating conversation. You want to be able to give your performance report to your audience and have them say, oh, what I see here is, and then ask questions. So as Courtney said, when you figure out colors that you want to use or representations that you want to use, that will help the audience understand what data that they're looking for. And then be able to help people say, okay, now they've got these reports, they've had some conversation, they've asked questions, they see how things relate to each other. Now, what's the decision-making process that is going to be based on what we've seen so far? So, Courtney, you're going to tell us, you're going to give us what will we do with this information? You're going to help us think about what we're going to do with what we have learned today.
Yeah, so in thinking about how all this comes together, how it ties back to the organizational standards, we've presented these examples of making sure that your strategic plan has those elements that then feed nicely into what a scorecard or dashboard would include. And we want to make sure that we're thinking about how all of that ties back to how we're meeting the organizational standards. So being able to make sure that we have, as we're looking at standard 5 or 6.5, and we're thinking about how we're reporting that strategic plan progress to the board, that scorecard can work to do that. And then also looking at 9.5, if we have this scorecard that is reporting on the outcomes, and helping to look at comparisons, maybe some trends or patterns over time, then that is what's already starting to get us to this analysis piece. So looking back to these standards, looking at the analysis of the agency's outcomes. And a lot of times that's the piece that is missed in this standard 9.3 is that analysis piece and how to show that that is being done. And also making sure that the board is engaged in that conversation for any necessary adjustments or improvements that are identified. Not that they have to be identified, but based on analysis, they might be. So that's just, this scorecard or dashboard can be a really good tool to be able to help hit all of these different pieces. The fiscal data that needs to be reported, the programmatic data, the customer satisfaction data, because all of those elements can be included in the scorecard and then therefore the dashboard to give that visual appeal to it. And then, I think the other part of kind of the key learning from today that we wanted to make sure was impressed upon was looking at how do we really make sure that this is all integrated, that there's this formal, systematic, process that all connects. So even as we look back I'm surprised we didn't have a picture of the Roma cycle in this presentation. But even if we visualize, we can picture it in our head, and hopefully all 131 of you can picture the Roma cycle in your head. And how all of that then connects, because, you know, when we talk about assessment and planning, we always want to make sure that those pieces connect, you know, that the, you know, high priority needs that are identified in the community needs assessment are then feeding into what's going to be the focus of the strategic plan for the organization. And then that feeds into what those implementation plans are going to look like for agency programs, for the services and strategies that the agency is conducting. And then, of course, that should then feed into that achievement of the results that's reported in the strategic plan scorecards and dashboards to the board, and then that evaluation and analysis should be taking place based on all of that. And then, of course, feeding into that next cycle. So, you know, that's, I think, where the importance of all of this is, and it helps to establish good decision-making processes for the organization. And I think right now we just want to kind of challenge you all to think about what are those things what is maybe that one thing that your organization can do for a next step on this. Maybe you already have a scorecard or dashboard, but you're working to improve it. Maybe you don't have one at all, but you're wondering, how do I better meet these standards? How do we better improve our process for decision making and improvement? So go ahead and type some ideas in the chat if you're on the web platform. Just one thing I want you to think about that you will do next, whether it is drafting out a template, maybe just simply asking your board what information they would like to start receiving that they might not be already. Maybe it's just looking at your data collection processes. Maybe it's just identifying what data you have. So as I go through these different resources, I want you all to type in what you'll do next. You can send it to all attendees or everyone if you have that option in the chat. And then we can kind of see those ideas of the one thing that you plan to do next as a result of what we've talked about. So I'll go through the resources, but we'll come back to what the chat says, and then we'll answer some questions too if you have them. So just to make sure that you guys are aware of the resources we have related to organizational standards and standards of excellence, you know, you can find that on the partnership website, communityactionpartnership.com/organizational-standards. We also have our TA guides that go into each category of the organizational standard if you're wanting to get more information on additional guidance for definitions, compliance, documentation. Then also we do have these additional webinars that focus in on some different areas of the standards. So we have recordings available related to risk management, effective governance in times of crisis, also the board's role in setting the mission and direction of the organization. And then, of course, today we focused on that strategic plan progress, and we'll have slides and a recording available for you all to review on that, or to share with people in your organization. And then November 12th, we'll be talking about staff orientation and training, looking at some different HR standards. And then, of course, we have our HCCT webpage. This does come from our Center of Excellence on Human Capacity and Community Transformation at the Partnership. So that's where our recordings and slides from this series will be posted. So with that, I'm going to go and take a look at the chat. It looks like several people have put in some ideas that Lauren has shared out with us. Thank you, Lauren.
Yeah, I like one of the ones was decide on a purpose, and I think that is a really good first step. Is just to really to know where you're going. Always good to know where you're going before you start out.
Yeah, we had some other comments about aligning the strategic plan with the board report, creating a template for a dashboard, looking at how we're collecting and reporting the data, currently designing a strategic plan scorecard, so timely information, looking at various reports and drafting a scorecard to bring information together to present to the board. Great. Those are all good next steps. So any concluding words?
Yeah, one of the things that people think about is, well, what software shall I buy to make a dashboard? And that really isn't necessarily a first choice. There are lots of things that you can do using Excel spreadsheets or using Google Docs or Google Google Studio is one. Things that usually come with your software. You don't have to go out and buy an expensive package. Try to do it on your own first, and then you'll know what features you want as you get more sophisticated.
Yep, absolutely. Starting simple with the data that you have and the tools that you have is really the best place to start. All right. Well, we are right at time. So thank you again to everyone for joining us today. If you have any additional questions on this topic or otherwise, feel free to reach out to us at the Center of Excellence or Barbara and Carrie at the Association for Nationally Certified Roma Trainers. As we said, we'll be sharing out the recording and slides. It'll be in a follow-up email as well as on the HCCT webpage. So thanks again, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you.